My name is Eleanor. I am 28 years old, and I live in a quiet, tree-lined corner of Chicago called Lincoln Park. Small bookstores, warm coffee shops, neighbors who wave when you pass. From the outside, my life looks like something people write letters home about. I have a husband. I have a comfortable apartment. I have a steady job managing a small bookstore 2 blocks from my building. By every measure society hands us, I should be happy. But every morning, I wake up with a heaviness in my chest that no amount of sunlight through my window can lift. 1 year ago, I made a promise I never should have made. I married a man named Ray. Ray is 32. He is patient, steady, and quietly kind in a way that most people only read about in novels. But here is the truth I have carried like a stone in my pocket for 365 days. I do not love him. I never did. I married Ray not because my heart chose him, but because my heart had just been shattered by someone else, a man named Marcus. Marcus and I were together for almost 3 years. I believed, foolishly and completely, that we were building something permanent. And then, 2 weeks before I expected him to propose, I learned the truth by accident. A message on his phone, a hotel receipt, a story that unraveled faster than I could hold it together. He had been living a double life for months. When I confronted him, he didn't even apologize. He simply said, "I thought you'd never find out." Then he left. I did not just lose a boyfriend. I lost my ability to trust that love was something safe to believe in. Ray was there in those weeks after, not pursuing me, not pressuring me, just present. He brought me coffee. He sat with me in silence when I couldn't speak. And somewhere in my grief, I convinced myself that safety was close enough to love. I told myself that maybe passion was overrated, that maybe what I needed was kindness, not fire. So when Ray asked me to marry him beneath the old oak tree in the park near our building, I said yes, not because my heart leaped, but because I was tired of feeling broken, and Ray felt like the opposite of broken. I thought love would grow later, the way my mother always said it could. It never came. Now I am the one causing the pain I once swore I would never inflict on anyone else. Ray brings me flowers every Friday. He leaves small handwritten notes tucked into my lunch bag. He calls me sunshine and kisses my forehead like it's a small, sacred ritual. Any woman would call herself lucky. I call myself a fraud, because every single day I smile when I don't feel joy. I say thank you when I feel nothing at all. And somewhere beneath all of it, a quiet, terrified voice keeps whispering the same question. How long can a person live inside a lie before the lie becomes the only thing left of them? Ray's love, if nothing else, consistent. Every Friday, without fail, he brings home a small bundle of flowers, sometimes sunflowers, sometimes wildflowers from the corner stand on Armitage Avenue, and sets them in the blue vase by our kitchen window, like he's placing an offering on an altar. When I'm too tired to cook, he makes dinner without complaint. He tucks small handwritten notes into my lunch bag. "Have a beautiful day, sunshine," or "Thinking of you at 2 p.m. Don't ask why. Little paper proofs that someone somewhere is thinking of me with tenderness. Any woman would call herself fortunate. One evening, we sat together on the balcony of our apartment. The city lights blinked below us like scattered stars that had fallen and forgotten how to rise again. Ray reached for my hand, and I let him take it, the way you let someone hold something you no longer believe belongs to you. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I know you don't love me yet. Not the way I love you, but I believe you will. And until then, my love is enough for both of us." His words should have felt romantic. Instead, they felt like a verdict, a sentence I hadn't agreed to serve, but was serving anyway. I smiled at him in the dark so he wouldn't see that my eyes had filled with something closer to grief than gratitude. That night, I started writing in a journal I kept hidden in my nightstand drawer. Not letters to anyone, just words, spilling out of me like something that had been damned too long. I am lying to a good man every single day, and I don't know how to stop without destroying him. A week later, I called my mother. I didn't tell her everything. Some truths feel too dangerous to say out loud, even to the person who raised you, but I hinted enough that she understood. Eleanor, she said, in that steady voice she's used my whole life to talk me down from ledges, real and metaphorical. Love isn't always lightning. Sometimes it's built, brick by brick, out of respect and patience, and choosing someone again and again. Marriage was never supposed to be about fireworks. I wanted so badly to believe her. I tried to believe her. I told myself that maybe I was simply impatient, that maybe love with Ray was quietly under construction, waiting for me to notice its foundation had already been poured. But lying awake beside him that night, listening to his slow, peaceful breathing, a different, quieter voice rose inside me, one I had been trying to silence for months. Staying because he is kind is not the same thing as loving him. It is using his kindness as a shelter from my own fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being wrong again, fear of admitting that I built a marriage on the ashes of someone else's betrayal, instead of on anything real of my own. That isn't fairness. That isn't grace. That is a slower, gentler kind of dishonesty, and it is still dishonesty. I closed the journal that night and did not open it again for weeks. Some truths, once written, are too heavy to look at twice. The question came on an ordinary Sunday, over coffee, with no warning at all. Eleanor, Ray said, setting down his mug, his eyes carrying that soft hopefulness they always did, what would you think about having a baby? I think it might bring us closer. I froze. The coffee in my hands suddenly felt too hot to hold. A part of me understood exactly what he was really asking. He wasn't just asking for a child. He was asking for proof that this marriage was real, that the distance he must have felt growing between us, even if he couldn't name it, could be closed by something as permanent and binding as a baby's first cry. The thought terrified me in a way I wasn't prepared for. Bringing a child into a marriage built on a lie felt less like love and more like a trap with two doors, both leading nowhere kind. I'm not ready, Ray, I said quietly, staring at my hands instead of his face. He nodded slowly. He didn't argue, he didn't push. He simply absorbed the disappointment the way he absorbed everything, without complaint, without a single accusation, and somehow, his silence hurt worse than any argument could have. A fight I could have survived. His quiet, patient sadness felt like something I would carry for the rest of my life. That night, after he had fallen asleep, I got out of bed. I found a duffel bag in the back of our closet and, without fully deciding to, began folding clothes into it. My hands moved faster than my mind could keep up with. I told myself I was just packing. I told myself I hadn't decided anything. I stood by our bedroom door for a long time, bag in hand, watching Ray sleep in the blue light of the street lamp outside our window. He looked peaceful. He looked like a man who trusted the world completely, who trusted me completely. I couldn't do it. I set the bag down on the floor, sat beside it, and cried without making a sound, the kind of crying that comes from exhaustion rather than a single moment of pain, the kind that has been building quietly for months. The next afternoon, I called my closest friend, Nora. We had known each other since college, and she was the only person I trusted enough to say the words out loud. Eleanor, you sound tired, she said the moment she picked up. Are you okay? I almost lied. I almost said I'm fine. Instead, something in me finally broke open. I don't love him, Nora, I whispered. I never did. I married Ray because I was running from what Marcus did to me, and I thought safety was close enough to love. But I feel trapped now. I feel like I'm suffocating a good man with my silence. There was a long pause on the line. Then Nora said gently, maybe you need space. Maybe some time apart would help you hear your own heart more clearly. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. It's not time I need, Nora. My heart simply doesn't feel anything for him, and I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending it does. The following week, Ray suggested we get away for the weekend. Lake Geneva, he said, his face lighting up with the particular hope of a man trying to save something he could feel slipping. though he couldn't yet name what it was. Just the two of us. Maybe the fresh air will do us both good. I said yes, the way I had learned to say yes to almost everything, not because I wanted to, but because saying no felt like handing him one more small, quiet wound. We drove the 2 hours mostly in comfortable silence, the Wisconsin countryside rolling past in shades of green I couldn't quite let myself enjoy. The lake, when we arrived, was breathtakingly calm, glass still water reflecting a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. It was, by every objective measure, beautiful. I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt everything except what I was supposed to feel. That evening, we walked along the shoreline as the sun began to lower itself behind the water. Ray took photographs. He laughed at something a family of ducks did near the dock. He held my hand and asked, "This is nice, isn't it?" And I nodded, because I didn't know how to explain that I was walking through someone else's dream, a life that fit me the way borrowed clothes fit, close enough to pass, never close enough to feel like mine. Later, in our small hotel room, Ray handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, a tiny heart pendant catching the lamplight. "This is for you," he said softly. "My heart is yours, Eleanor. It always will be." Tears rose in my eyes, not from joy, but from the crushing weight of knowing I did not deserve a gift given with that much sincerity. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely above the sound of the waves outside. After he fell asleep, I sat on the floor near the bed, knees pulled to my chest, and let myself think, really think, about the day we met. I remembered how gentle Ray had been in those raw weeks after Marcus shattered everything I believed about love. He had never asked anything of me. He had simply shown up, again and again, with coffee and silence and steadiness, until I mistook his consistency for the cure to my grief. But sitting there in the dark, I finally understood something I had been avoiding for a year. I hadn't fallen in love with Ray. I had fallen in love with the feeling of finally being safe. Those are not the same thing, no matter how much I wanted them to be. When we returned to Chicago, something in me had shifted. I began writing letters, not in my old hidden journal, but new ones, addressed to no one but myself. "Eleanor, you are not a villain. You made a mistake, but you didn't make it out of cruelty. You made it out of pain. Now you have to be brave enough to face what pain built." Another letter, written a few nights later, read differently. "Ray is not your enemy. He is a good man who deserves an entire heart, not half of one wrapped in guilt. You cannot keep giving him half of yourself and calling it a marriage." Writing those words down did something strange to me. It didn't fix anything. But for the first time in a year, I could see my own situation clearly enough to know that clarity, however painful, was the only way forward. 3 weeks after we returned from Lake Geneva, I was restocking the poetry section at the bookstore when a voice I hadn't heard in over a year said my name. "Eleanor?" I turned around, and there was Marcus, a little older, a little grayer at the temples, standing in the doorway like a memory that accidentally wandered into the wrong decade. "I saw you through the window," he said, hands shoved awkwardly in his coat pockets. "I've been meaning to reach out for a long time. I owe you an apology I never gave you." For a moment, the whole store seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. This was the man who had once been the center of my entire world, the man whose betrayal had sent me running so blindly into Ray's arms that I mistook shelter for love. And now here he was, older, humbler, saying the words I had once imagined desperately wanting to hear. We sat at the small cafe table by the window for 20 minutes. He told me he had gone to therapy. He told me he understood now, years too late, what he had destroyed. He asked carefully if there was any chance at all, that we might try again. I sat there, searching myself, waiting for some flicker of the old feeling to rise. I braced myself for it, almost afraid of how strong it might be. It never came. I studied his face, the same face that used to make my chest tighten with longing, and felt nothing but a distant, almost clinical calm, the way you might feel looking at a photograph of a stranger's vacation. I noticed, almost with surprise, how ordinary he seemed now, how the years had smoothed away whatever urgency I once mistook for destiny. There was no ache, no pull, no unfinished sentence waiting between us. Just two people who had once shared a story that no longer belonged to either of us in the same way. Marcus, I said finally, thank you for the apology. I mean that. But I don't feel what I used to feel for you. I don't think I have for a long time. He nodded, disappointed but not surprised, and after a quiet goodbye, he left the store and, in many ways, left my life for good. I stood there for a long moment after the door closed behind him, stunned by my own reaction. I had spent an entire year believing that Marcus was the wound I was still bleeding from, that my inability to love Ray was somehow tangled up in unfinished feelings for the man who broke me. But standing in that empty store, surrounded by shelves of other people's stories, I understood something I had never let myself see clearly before. This was never about Marcus. It never was. The problem wasn't that I hadn't finished loving him. The problem was that I had never once, in the wreckage he left behind, stopped to love myself back into wholeness. I had skipped grief entirely and jumped straight into another person's arms, hoping his steadiness could do the healing I refused to do for myself. Ray had never been the wrong answer to a question about love. He had simply been an answer to a question I was never brave enough to ask honestly. Who am I, when no one else is holding me together? That night, walking home under the orange glow of the streetlights, I finally understood what I had to do, not for Marcus, not even entirely for Ray, but for the version of myself I had been abandoning for over a year. That evening, I made tea and asked Ray to sit with me on the couch. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly spilled both cups before I set them down. Ray, I said, I need to tell you something. He looked at me, and something in his face told me he already sensed what was coming. Still, he said softly, okay. I took the deepest breath of my life. I care about you. You are a genuinely good man. But I don't love you, Ray. I never did. I married you because I was drowning, and you felt like the only solid ground I could reach. I told myself love would grow later. It didn't, and I have been lying to you every single day since our wedding, and I am so sorry. I expected shouting. I expected the floor to fall out from under both of us. Instead, Ray sat very still, his eyes glistening but his voice steady. I know, Eleanor, he said quietly. I've known almost since the beginning. I saw it in the way you'd look at me sometimes, like you were apologizing with your eyes for something you hadn't said yet. I stared at him, stunned. Then why did you stay? Why did you marry me anyway? Ray was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Because after my father passed, and after Diane left me the year before we met, I was terrified of being alone in a way I never told anyone about. You were kind to me, even distracted, even distant. I told myself that loving you enough for both of us was better than an empty apartment and silence every night. I think we were both using each other's presence to survive something. I just never dared to say it. For a moment, something like relief passed between us, the strange, aching relief of two people finally being honest at the same time. But then his composure cracked. He stood up abruptly, his voice rising for the first time in the entire year I had known him. A year, Eleanor. A year of flowers, and notes and hoping, and you're telling me now, after I asked you for a child. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. I need to not be here right now. The door closed harder than I had ever heard it close. I sat alone on the couch for a long time, crying quietly, understanding for the first time that Ray's kindness had never meant he was incapable of pain, only that he had been carrying it silently the same way I had. He didn't come home that night. I didn't sleep. The next morning I heard his key in the lock around 7. He walked in, exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed, and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. I was angry, he said simply. I think I had a right to be. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm just sad. And maybe, underneath all of it, a little relieved that neither of us has to pretend anymore. I reached across the table and took his hand, and for the first time in a year, neither of us let go out of fear. The days that followed were quiet in a way our apartment had never been quiet before, not the tense silence of two people avoiding each other, but something gentler, almost like the stillness after a long fever finally breaks. We still lived under the same roof, but I moved into the small guest room, and Ray stayed in the bedroom we once shared. In the mornings, he still made coffee for two out of habit, setting a cup on the table before catching himself, and simply sliding it toward me without a word. There were no more notes tucked into my lunch bag, no more Friday flowers, just a careful, honest quiet. One evening, about a week later, I sat him down and said the words I had been building the courage to say. I think it's time for me to move out, Ray. Nora offered me her guest room until I find my own place. He didn't look surprised. He simply nodded slowly, turning his coffee mug in his hands. Do you have somewhere safe to go? Yes, I said. Nora's. Good, he said. And then, after a pause, I'm not angry anymore, Eleanor. I'm sad. I think I'll be sad for a while, but I believe this is the right thing for both of us. Tears blurred my vision. I never wanted to break your heart, Ray. I want you to know that. He offered me a small, tired smile, the same smile that had once made me believe kindness could be mistaken for love. You didn't break my heart, Eleanor. I gave it to you freely, even knowing you might not be able to keep it safe forever. I don't regret loving you. I think I'd rather have loved you honestly and lost than never have loved at all. The next morning, I packed my clothes and a small box of books into the trunk of Nora's car. The apartment, despite only holding a single year of our life together, felt unbearably heavy with memory, his coffee mug still in the sink, our wedding photograph on the shelf, the blanket we used to share while watching old movies on quiet Sunday nights. Ray carried my last bag down to the car himself. At the door, he said simply, "If you ever need anything, anything at all, call me." "Thank you for everything, Ray," I said, my voice breaking on his name. "You were always, always good to me." He looked at me one final time, his eyes soft but steady. "Take care of yourself, Eleanor. I mean that." Then I walked out of the apartment that had held both my dishonesty and my slow, painful becoming, and I did not look back, not out of coldness, but because I finally understood that looking back would only pull me into a version of myself I no longer needed to be. Nora was waiting by the curb, engine running, a small, encouraging smile on her face. "Let's go," she said gently. I climbed into the passenger seat, and as the car pulled away from the curb, I felt something unexpected rise up beneath the grief, something small, fragile, and entirely new. For the first time in over a year, I had made a choice for no one but myself, and terrifying as it was, it felt at last like the truth. I stayed at Nora's apartment for several weeks, sleeping in her small guest room, helping her cook, and sometimes just sitting quietly together while she let me cry without asking me to explain. She never once pushed me to talk before I was ready. I started taking long walks along the lakefront, watching strangers walk their dogs and ride their bikes, letting the ordinary rhythm of other people's lives remind me that mine could continue too. One afternoon, I noticed a flyer taped to the window of a small cafe, a creative writing class at the community center, starting that week. Something in me, quiet but insistent, said, "Try this." So I signed up. The class was small, just 8 of us, reading our work aloud to one another in a circle of mismatched chairs. At first, I was too afraid to share anything true, but slowly, week by week, I began writing about my grief, my mistakes, my slow return to myself. One evening after class, I wrote a single line in my notebook that made me smile for the first time in what felt like forever. I lost love before I ever truly found it. But I am finally finding myself. A few weeks later, a text arrived from Ray. "Hi, Eleanor. I hope you're doing well. I've actually taken up a cooking class myself. It keeps me busy. No pressure to respond. Just wanted you to know I'm okay." I smiled and I wrote back, "Hi, Ray. Thank you for telling me. I'm glad you're doing okay. I'm in a writing class now. It's helping more than I expected. Wishing you peace always. We didn't speak again after that. But it felt good, saying goodbye kindly, the way two people who once cared for each other deeply deserve to. Months passed. I found a small studio apartment near the bookstore, nothing fancy, but entirely mine. I painted the walls a soft, buttery yellow. I put fresh flowers in the window, not because a Friday tradition demanded it, but simply because I wanted to. One afternoon, Nora mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd run into Ray at the farmer's market, laughing beside someone new, his whole posture lighter than she'd seen in years. I felt something unexpected settle in my chest, not jealousy, not grief, but a quiet, genuine relief. He deserved that. He deserved someone who could love him with an entire, undivided heart, the very thing I had never been able to give him. One night, looking in the mirror, I saw a woman with tired eyes and a soft, honest smile, someone who had been lost, but was now walking a path entirely her own. It is not a perfect story, but it is mine, and I am still learning, still growing, still healing. If there is one thing I know now, with absolute certainty, it is this. Never marry for the wrong reasons, and never silence the truth your own heart is trying to tell you. If someone out there feels like I once did, trapped inside a life that looks right but feels hollow, please hear me. You are not alone. It is never too late to be honest. It is never too late to begin again. From which city or corner of the world are you listening to Eleanor and Ray's journey tonight? Please drop the name of your city or state in the comments below. Let us fill the comment section with our global community, proving that human connection and compassion are burning brightly from Texas, Chicago, and London, all the way to wherever you are breathing right now. And if you are anxious to see the next chapter of this journey, please comment part 2. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this message of hope, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next deeply human story. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and above all, stay kind.